All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off with the Middle Ages. We started talking last week a little bit about nation states. Specifically, we started talking about England and the influence of the Magna Carta, which had a significant influence on the Constitution of the United States, as we talked about. We also talked about the early Middle Ages and kind of how we kind of developed. Right now, we're kind of focusing on the mid to late Middle Ages with the establishment of nation states. So when we're looking at nation states, we're really looking at how we went from these very, very small kingdoms to these larger kingdoms that eventually become the countries that we know today. One of those countries is France. So France had previously kind of been established as the Gaul region, Gaul. And so France eventually does become the France that we know because of the Franks, which eventually are superseded by the Capets. So Hugh Capet established the very first monarchy in France, in Paris. And the Capetian dynasty, led by his family, united most of France, and eventually King Philip II, who was also known as Augustus, that's a nice little throwback to the Roman Emperor Augustus, made Paris the French capital. It's kind of important to keep in mind here with us talking about Augustus and how that kind of had an influence on how Rome continued to have an influence on the Western Roman Empire, even though it had fallen at this point. Now, the French and the English came into conflict over the heir to the French throne. When the last Capetian French king died, there was conflict over who should be the heir. The English said that because they had their monarch had Capetian blood, that he should be the heir, while the French didn't really want that. It's important to kind of keep in mind here that many of these kings, they had married off their children to other monarchs to kind of influence and keep those strong connections between the monarchical families. It was a way to keep an alliance. And so there is really a lot of family connections between the different monarchs, which is why English King Edward wanted to claim his right to the French throne and thought that he had the right to it. So as a result of his belief, he invaded France, which began the 100 Years' War, which, as you can probably guess, lasted about 100 years. Now, one of the major figures that came out of the 100 Years' War was the Joan of Arc. She was about y'all's age, about 14. She had a vision from God that essentially said that you're going to lead the French into battle, you're going to lead the French into victory. And so she went to the troops and was like, hey guys, I'm going to lead you guys to victory. God kind of told me this. And the French troops follow her, lead them into battle, and the French find victory. It became a unifying factor for the French troops, and she's kind of seen today as a symbol of women's strength and just strength in general. So after about 100 years later, the French are finally able to push out the English. So they are able to push the English out. They keep the French throne. This really increases the power of the French monarchy for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have now fought for their right to have a French monarch, and so the French monarch is going to kind of be seen as a person of the people because the people have been fighting for them. Number two, the monarch also has these powers of taxation that would have been increased during this 100 Years' War. Very similarly, in England, the English Parliament are going to be the ones that are gaining the most power. Remember, the Magna Carta kind of withdrew some of the powers of the king and limited the king's power. The king had to, as a result of the Magna Carta, go to Parliament to ask for money for the war. And so the 100 Years' War strengthened Parliament because the king constantly had to ask for more money for the war. Overall, this led to increased nationalism. People started to now see themselves as French, as British. People didn't view the king as this feudal lord who kind of gave protection or whatever, but as a national leader. They really tried to rally behind their particular country rather than for their own purposes. In Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, the two monarchs who you may know best for supporting Christopher Columbus, were able to unify most of Spain, and they tried to get rid of all the Jews and the Moors. The Moors are Muslims that had resided in Spain since the Spanish Caliphate was established under the Muslim Empire. Now, Ferdinand and Isabella are Catholic, and so they are trying to get all other influence of other religions out of Spain and really trying to keep Catholicism as the number one thing. They led this movement called the Reconquista, otherwise known as the Spanish Inquisition, to get rid of anybody who didn't profess their faith in God and the Catholic Church. They either killed them or tried to get them out of Spain. Now, the Spanish Empire overall does expand to the Western Hemisphere, which we'll talk about with Latin America, the Incas, Aztecs, and Mayans under Charles V. Russia has come a long way since we talked about them with the Byzantine Empire. They had a lot of invasions by the Mongols, and Ivan the Great was able to defend Russia from those invasions. He centralized his power in Moscow and really tries to expand the Russian nation, really creating the Russia that we know today. Now, their monarchs are not called kings, they're called czars, which is the Russian word for ruler. So as we are starting to see our expansion of Europe at this time, we've already talked about France and Spain, England, the migrations that kind of created England. Russia is up here. Now we're going to start to talk about the Crusades. All of these European countries participated in the Crusades, and their effort was focused in on this area here, which holds Jerusalem, Aleppo, Tripoli, and some of the other holy lands. So, in the Crusades, Christians are launching a series of these religious wars. There are wars against Muslims, attempting to get the Holy Land back from the Muslims. It's kind of important to keep in mind here. The Muslims also consider this land to be holy because again, they represent the prophets from Christianity here. They have some of the same beliefs. They also believe that Jesus was a prophet, things of that nature. Okay, so the start of the Crusades occurs because Emperor Alexius of the Byzantine Empire appeals to Pope Urban for help trying to defeat the Muslims, because the Byzantine Empire is located right here. They're very close to the Muslim Empire, which is kind of over in this Arabian Peninsula area. Okay. Pope Urban then calls on Christians to take up arms and aid the Byzantines in reconquering the Holy Land. Again, trying this big focus here on religion, ousting Muslims, and really focusing on Christianity as the only religion in the world. Now, the First Crusade is very, very successful. They're able to found 4 new states: Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, and Tripoli. And each one of these is controlled by a different European monarch. After the First Crusade, many of the Crusaders went home, right? They were very successful. They were able to establish different states, which led to a Muslim counterattack, and the Muslims were able to gain back Edessa. The Crusaders essentially left the land open for conquering, and the Muslims took advantage of that. This led to a call for the Second Crusade, because they were like, oh no, our land got taken. Let's go back, and we're going to try to make sure that we're protecting our land from those Muslim invaders. However, because there's not as many of them there, the Muslims are going to defeat the Christian Crusaders and are going to be successful at taking back some of that land. Now, Saladin was one of the best-known leaders of the Muslim forces, and he led a campaign specifically against Jerusalem, attempting to get Jerusalem back under Muslim control. This inspires the Third Crusade, because Jerusalem is really the one area in which they don't want Muslims to take over, because Jerusalem was so holy to Christians. The Muslim and European forces, they fought against one another and eventually reached an agreement that returns Jerusalem to the Muslims. Although the Pope calls for a Fourth Crusade, the Crusaders really try to focus on expanding the Catholic influence at this point. Because remember, the Byzantine Empire is not Catholic. They're Greek Orthodox. And so they really want to focus on getting rid of the Byzantine Emperor and influencing them to make sure that Catholicism is the only form of Christianity available in Europe. The Fourth Crusade ends with the toppling of Constantinople by those Western Crusaders, and the Byzantine Empire essentially ends. Now, overall, the effects of the Crusade. It strengthens monarchs who gain new powers of taxation as a result of the Crusades. Because remember, the monarchs have to ask the people for money in order to keep going. It causes a disillusionment with the popes and the nobles, who begin to launch and fight crusades against fellow Christians. Specifically, that Fourth Crusade that they fought against the Greek Orthodox Church and against the Byzantine Empire is going to have a really big influence on this. They're going to have trusted the popes and trusted the nobles to lead them in a Christian a Christian act, and they're going to kind of see that as not happening. It also is going to stimulate trade between Muslims and the Christian empires. Muslim technology, like the astrolabe and map making and things of that knowledge, is going to spread throughout Europe, which is eventually going to lead to European expansion into the New World, aka the Americas, and into Africa. It also leads to a significant intolerance of other religions, meaning that Christians, Muslims, and Jews begin to hate each other, right? Muslims obviously are going to hate Christians because they're invading their land, but the Jews are also going to start hating the Christians because the Christians had attacked a lot of the Jewish communities in the Holy Land and in Europe on their way to the Holy Land to fight. The Crusades ultimately does weaken the Byzantine Empire and leads to its end. Okay, Constantinople fell to the Muslims, the Ottoman Turks, in 1453, and that ends the Byzantine Empire. They were weakened by that Fourth Crusade, and they eventually become a Muslim nation under the Ottoman Turks, and Constantinople then becomes the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Okay. So this is all the notes we're going to take for today. At this point, I want you to go back, add your annotations, add some potential test questions, and add it to your summary. The next thing that we're going to do is work on looking at what happened during the very first crusade. I will upload this video with the times that I want you to watch so that you kind of have that. It will give you a viewing of the first crusade. It can be a little violent, so kind of keep that in mind here, that in case that is something that you're sensitive to. Thank you.